Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Regulatory Voices. Today, I'm joined by Andie Collier, and really looking forward to having this conversation. Regulatory Voices was built as a community and platform for people in regulatory affairs in pharma and biotech to engage and communicate with each other, share stories and experiences, and hopefully make this an area where people can learn from each other. So, as I said, Andie Collier is who I'm with today. Andie, could you please tell everybody a bit about yourself, a bit of a high-level
Sure.
overview of your career so far?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. I'm glad you guys are joining. I'm a pharmacist by training. I have a master's in regulatory science and have been working regulatory and quality for the past 31 years. I bet on you, Connor. You just gave my age away, but that's okay. I'm lucky enough to have worked in large pharma and in a startup biotech. And I also lived in the US, in Europe, and in South America. So I have the experience of working in 3 different time zones for sure and different cultures.
Was regulatory something you always planned to move into, or did it happen naturally?
I started actually as a scientist on the bench. I quickly moved into quality, but regulatory became my passion. I think it was perfect for me because it was a combination of my knowledge, my love for knowledge and reading, and being involved in early innovation. I think that
Hmm.
suits me very well. So that's how it was almost progressive. It was not really something that I got out of college and say, that's what I'm going to do. Because I actually took a break between my bachelor's and my master's. And
Hmm.
actually, when I was already in regulatory, when I decided I'm going to go into a master's because I want to learn more. So that's how I ended
Okay,
up being. But it started on the bench, which was quite nice.
nice. And you mentioned obviously on the bench, you done quality as well. Were there any other early roles or experiences that shaped how you think about regulatory today?
I think for me, starting on as a scientist on the bench made me a very strong regulatory person.
Hmm.
Understanding it's quite important because understanding the processes, the ability to follow protocol and get reliable data, questioning what we and the regulators, if you think about it, should be expecting. All of it shaped my regulatory thinking. I
Hmm.
think that was quite important.
Okay. And going into the first topic, it will definitely link to your regulatory thinking and your development. Is one thing that comes up a lot is big company versus small company, particularly regulatory affairs in that space. And you're someone who's actually managed to have those environments in different geographies. So you've got a unique skill set and a unique view into that world. My first question is, what were your first impressions when moving between a large pharma company into, say, a smaller pharma or biotech company?
I think there are pros and cons on both, and you need
Hmm.
to understand, that there will be pros and cons. I think large companies come with a structure, most of the time, well written procedures, and I say most of the time, good foundation, a
Hmm.
very good infrastructure. And I work in large companies in 3 continents, and I saw that a lot of well written procedures, very well for someone like me that was in the beginning, because actually was very easy for me to fit into that setting and
Hmm.
learn from that. For someone that is pretty new to regulatory, that can be very reassuring. So I think
Hmm.
that was the good thing. Most biotechs are learning as they go. They have only 1 or 2 assets. They're putting everything that they have into it, which actually foster innovation, foster, and that ability to move very quickly. Okay.
Hmm.
So actually can be quite exciting. When I moved to a small biotech, I was working 9 hours a week and I was having fun because that is
Hmm.
exciting. But there, you need to understand there is a lack of, sometimes the structure path is not there yet. It's kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah,
say, you're building the plane as you go, as you fly. And
yeah.
that can be very frustrating sometimes, because if you're really starting and you don't have that background, the infrastructure, you're like,
Hmm.
okay, what the heck am I doing now? So there's pros and cons on there.
I was going to ask, was there a moment where when you joined a small company for the first time where you went, okay, wow, this is different? Was there that sort of
There
light
was.
bulb moment? Okay.
There was one, my first small company. It was kind of interesting because I was hired, and it was literally the
Hmm.
VP of regulatory and quality. So he was senior VP of regulatory and quality, and me, and then 2 other
Yeah, yeah.
contractors. And I was an associate 3 at that time. And he looked at me, he says, okay, we need to have a meeting with FDA. go ahead. And I'm like, because when I was in pharma, at Merck, you don't go and you lead FT meeting until you're senior manager. And now I'm an
Yeah, yeah.
associate three. And I'm like, okay, I better get this thing done. So that's the whole thing. When you when you work with biotechs, you need to understand that at times you will be outside of your comfort zone. And
Yeah, yeah.
at times you're gonna need to say, okay. And I personally, I'm not one of those people that like to wing it. So
Mhm.
I was like, oh my goodness. So I
Yeah.
remember over preparing, over studying, understanding. And although build character, I want to be honest with you, I don't think I would do that with my employees. With my as a
Mhm.
leader, I think it was a lot of responsibility for someone so young, or
Yeah.
professionally young, if you will.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a case for that in just leadership training in general. Just because you learn that way doesn't mean that's how it should be taught.
Yeah,
Sometimes you learn those lessons, but you realize, okay, how can I apply that in a healthier environment? So I think that's a good distinction to make, because I think there's a tendency to over glorify, this was tough when I was doing it, it should be tough for you as well, which I don't necessarily agree with. Is how you should mentor the next generation.
absolutely agree with you. Absolutely. Because the reality is, part of our learning is to understand, yes, there are a couple things that by putting people outside their comfort zone,
Hmm.
they help them to actually evolve. But you cannot put them in a situation they're going to fail, because then it's going
Hmm.
to create a problem. And I was in a situation, I was leading FDA meeting with a lot of people. And for me, it took me days of preparation. But in the
Hmm.
end of the day, if you ask me, do you want to put in that situation? I wouldn't. I wouldn't put employee, because the probability of failure could have been very high,
Yeah.
and the stakes were high, because
Hmm.
actually we had two assets at that time. If we had failed one because I said something wrong, and there's a lot of responsibility to put in a young
Of
professional. So I
course.
think I would do, as a leader, I would do something different. I would actually. This is what I tell people. I even bring sometimes even my interns. I like to bring interns from the masters from regulatory affairs to the programs and give them summer internship. And I bring them to
Hmm.
FTA. And I said to them, you're not going to speak, and I do explain to FTA and to the EMEA before they're coming in as a learning opportunity for them. This is what they're in. For them to listen, because it's important to understand exactly how this process works. Because listen, I work with people that are managers and have never been to the FTA meetings, or have never
Yeah.
been, because depends on where they were, or because their leaders or their managers never gave them the experience. So I think it's important to help them and not put in a situation that they will feel like, "Oh, what am I going to do now?" Because
Hmm.
there's a difference there. We need to find a balance.
Yeah. And well, my next question was going to be, how does the role of regulatory change depending on the size of the company? You mentioned a bit of it, which is you're way more hands on and you're exposed to way more. Is there any other things that are maybe not necessarily highlighted when you're, and how regulatory changes in different sizes?
So in big pharma, you will be doing what you hire and assign to do. It's going to be
Okay.
very difficult for you to actually expand, only if you actually get promoted to a different position, which actually I
Okay.
think I would recommend. If you actually are
Hmm.
in big pharma, don't, instead of thinking about moving out of big pharma, think about it. You know what? I can apply for different positions within regulatory, because that's what I did,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it worked quite well for me. Because big pharma is a oil machine. That's the
Yeah.
reality. Everyone has a place, and you probably won't be experiencing anything different than that area. So if you're CMC, you're going to be in CMC. You're labeling, So I think that you could be doing this for years, and if you like it, that works for you. But one of the things that I think that people forget is that because of that, you can actually apply. So if you ask me what is the difference, apply for the positions in big pharma. Do you know,
Hmm.
apart from, I actually, one of the things I did, and it was completely by design. I was in J&J Pharma, and I want to do J&J drug device combination. This was
Hmm.
over 20 years ago, when drug device combination was very new. So I
Hmm.
actually decide that for me it was important to do that for my career, for my own understanding. So I asked for transfer to a drug device combination,
Hmm.
part of J&J company. And that's what I did. It was a lateral transfer at that time. And people like, why are you doing this? Because I now have a knowledge that for me was important to have. So I came in, and instead of having a drug device, actually it was a device drug. So it was a
Hmm.
PMA for the FDA. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Versus a NDA. So it was a completely different way, perspective, and learning opportunity for me. So that's what I did. That doesn't mean that I move out of the infrastructure of Johnson Johnson. I actually just moved from one company to another and used that as opportunity. So those are the kind of things
Yeah.
that one can do to actually develop themselves and help their career.
And I think you've gone really nicely into something that I wanted to highlight, which is, in a large company, especially today, roles can be very specialized and there doesn't seem to be as much ability to maneuver in other areas. Whereas in a smaller company, you can be wearing many hats. And you've highlighted a bit of it there, but if you could expand upon how does that actually change the way that regulatory professionals develop by specializing too much too early?
I think it's quite interesting you're saying. I think this is the kind of conversation that we can have a full an hour discussion because it's quite a good thing to talk about it. But I think if you actually ask, I would say, in my opinion, it depends on one's personality. Let's start with
Okay.
the personality. In order to be successful, I really believe that we should understand who we are as people. Okay,
Hmm.
so I'll give you a little bit more details. Understand who you are as a person, your preferences, and then can help you professionally. So some people thrive on the oh no. Do you know what I mean? If you
Yeah.
like to jump out of airplanes, maybe big pharma full of structure is not for you. Do you know what I mean? If
Yeah.
you are the kind of person that prefers structure, then perhaps big pharma as your beginning. So for me, I
Hmm.
was in the middle. I'm one of those people, I like adventures, but I'm not going to go anywhere without a hotel reservation. I need a plan. In the beginning of my career, I decided that I want to start a big pharma. So when I got out of college, I started applying for big pharma. That was and I had a timeline. I thought I'm going to stay my 5 years in big pharma and then I'm going to try something different. So that
Hmm.
was my understanding. I stay a little longer because, as I mentioned, for J&J, I was like, oh, I want to do some device stuff. I want to do it. And this thing, I think people need to understand. One, plans can change because the way as you grow as a person, you also grow professionally. You start thinking, oh,
Hmm.
I like this. I have a friend that she start in regulatory and then decide that she loves labeling.
Okay.
I'll tell you, if you put me in labeling, I will quit my job in 3 days. I don't even know if I survive 3 days because I would be find absolutely not what I want to do. But
Yeah.
between you and I, she found herself. She's one of the best label strategists that I know. Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean? And that's how she found herself. And it was funny because in the beginning, that was never what neither of us thought we would do. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So this is why I think know who you are, understand your personality, and then start build yourself around what you like personally. I think there's no wrong or right answer. I think there's just of understanding that it's not set in stone. Do you know what I mean? I had
Okay.
a very good plan in the sense of like, I want to be 5 years in big pharma. I'm going to do this. And it
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
really happen this way because as you see different opportunities and you're like, it's big pharma, but it was J&J, but I could go for one of those small J&J companies and learn something different. Be open
Yeah.
to it, but understand who you are. Because if you go to labeling and you hate it, that's a problem because now you're now stuck in labeling. Do you know what I mean? So that's the kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
You just, as long as you understand a little bit of where you are, you can start and then you can course correct as you need it.
And I think a part of that, if I can add from my own personal experience as well, is sometimes part of the journey of finding who you are is to try different things and to put yourself out of your comfort zone. My final question to you on this whole piece of big pharma, small companies is: do you think people should experience both during their career, or it's a kind of nice to have? You either end up in one or the other.
I think absolutely you should experience both, in my opinion.
Okay.
I think if you ask me, if someone tells me if I was a coach, I would say starting
Mm-hmm.
big pharma because the infrastructure there allows you to build your knowledge, allows you
Mm-hmm.
to build that solid foundation. Okay. For me, I wanted a solid foundation because I'm going to be very honest with you. It's very exciting work for big pharma, for biotechs, pardon me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you, sometimes can be very hard to build a plane when you're flying in the sense
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
regulations are changing and you're reading regulations and you're like never being tested. And then you don't have this huge support in place. Because big
Mm-hmm.
pharma, you're talking about, when I work for J&J, some of the departments, you're talking about regulatory, some of the regulatory CMCs, 21 people I had. So
Hmm.
if I had a question from FDA, I just will go to my regulatory CMC team and say, here it is. And guess what? If he comes to me and says you have 24 hours to answer, I could get the answer. If you are in small
Yeah, yeah.
pharma and you have that same 24 hours and it's only you, and now you're like, okay, this is outside of my comfort zone because I don't know anything about analytical methodology, guess what? So I think it's important to understand that a house without a foundation may not be a solid house. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I personally think that starting big pharma is a good way to go. How
Hmm.
long you stay in big pharma then depends on your personality. Then depends of what you actually enjoy, like it, and discover who you are.
And something that I wanted to highlight on this particular interview is something that I've noticed a lot with speaking to more experienced people and speaking to younger people is with the whole specialism piece at the moment. People are locking in a lot earlier, and they're kind of being held into that gap. And I'm starting to see some smaller companies are also trying to. Not trying to, some of them are mimicking that model of I've got a reg CMC person, a reg clinical, and a reg ops person, and we're seeing an almost erasure of the generalist person. And a backstep from that is a lot of people now aren't really understanding or experiencing the whole submission process. How important is it for people to actually understand the full submission process, even if they are just stuck in reg CMC or labeling or ops?
I think people should understand. I think regulatory operations is a bit difficult, a bit different because those people really especially specialize on that, on the
Hmm.
software and everything else that they need to do it. So they have it. So sometimes they're very good and they're very good at that and they're brilliant because I couldn't do any of it. So they're very specialized. Normally, I think if you think about it, if the company starts focusing you in certain things is okay. I think is actually that can be a good thing for a person, but they should understand the process because if you don't
Hmm.
understand the process, you're never going to become a strategic person, even if you're not a strategist. Okay, even if you're not, you're never going to become a regulatory strategic person
Hmm.
if you don't understand the entire process, because you need to understand that the end game to start to build the beginning to be able to get there. So I do
Hmm.
think that the full regulatory process is the minimal that one should know. They don't need to know the ins and outs. Okay, they don't
Of
need to become
course.
experts. Do you know what I mean? But it really, really you need to have a basic understanding, a little bit more than basic, I should say, but an understanding of where you are. But specialization is actually, unfortunately, is the future if you think about it,
Hmm.
because regulatory has become too big. But even with specialized programs, you can still be generalist. And I'll explain a little bit more. If you think about
Hmm.
it, you can be today, you can be drugs, you can be devices, you can be veterinary products. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So most of us do not have experience in all of them because
Yeah.
it becomes too big now. But you can still do a full regulatory process within drugs or with the
Hmm.
devices. So I think you can find yourself, in a way um, that you can be somehow general, but somewhat specialized, if you know what I mean. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm not saying get yourself on your CMC, but you can do just regulatory, devices and be specialized on that and say, okay, this is what I'm doing. Because right now, if you're talking about uh, 510K in the
Hmm.
US, but here in the EU, you're talking about notified bodies. It's a whole different story. So you can do something like that. You can actually, this is why regulatory is becoming so big that you can find your niche where you want to
Hmm.
be. That's the beauty of this. So the youngsters that are out there that is starting right now, just out of college, have a great opportunity. You can start and say, "Oh, listen, I can switch." I actually, on my career, I need to fight for it because at that time, as a pharmacist, I belong into pharma. I belong into
Yeah. Yeah.
drugs. Do you know what I mean? I actually need to say, I'm going to do a lateral position instead of getting a promotion, which they offer me. And I'm in a lateral position to go this because I wanted that experience and I
Yeah. Yeah.
pushed. And to be honest with you, I remember talking to one of the engineers saying, listen, she want to go to quality. So I said, okay, you help me to understand the engineer part of that, and I'll help you to understand quality. And that's what we should
Hmm.
do after working hours. I mean, but now regulatory is becoming so big that you can make some of the choices. So I guess it's back to that early discussion we had. Depends on your personality and how you find your way.
Hmm. I want to take this now into a bit of a different area, and one that I don't think gets highlighted actually that much. We mentioned that you've been lucky enough to work in European and US companies, and also be located in both areas as well. And in a few of our conversations in the past, you've highlighted that whilst people can read the regulations, they don't necessarily understand the cultural differences behind how those regulations are actually applied. So, in your opinion, how does European and US regulatory culture actually differ?
I would say, depending on the some points, very much so.
Hmm.
Sometimes they're not. So on paper, doesn't seem a lot.
Hmm.
So when you read a regulation, you will say, "Oh yeah, it's more or less the same." But how the regulators actually understand the regulation and how exactly each country, especially in Europe, apply the regulation, that's where the details come in. So I do think is very different. So I'll give you an example. So when you bring experts to FDA meeting,
Hmm.
the understanding from the FDA is you pay this person. I don't care if he has 10 published articles and they are the pediatric cancer expert. He's
Hmm.
paid, he's biased. He's paid by you. He was brought in by you. He's biased.
Yeah.
We're gonna hear what he has to say, but he has a pinch with a pinch of salt. Okay.
Hmm.
I actually had a situation, a meeting with FDA. The one of the FDA experts said to me, "I'm not interested to hear what this doctor has to say." Exactly in
Hmm.
the meeting, I had brought this person, and there was actually a very highly well known person, and that's what I
Hmm.
heard in the EMEA. They see that as this person has the knowledge, is working with this company, so they understand the importance of that, so they
Hmm.
understand how important is to do this. Let's listen, let's understand, let's work together,
Okay.
is more a collaborative attitude. So that's the difference, but on paper they seem absolutely the same. So actually
Yeah.
I tell people sometimes, I don't spend sometimes the time to bring some experts for FDA if I don't. A lot of people, especially European companies, now that I'm a consultant, and they say, we can get these experts and we can fly them. And I was like, don't worry about it. Because that's the kind of understanding is both ways.
Hmm.
So you just
And
need to
that's
understand
obviously,
exactly.
yeah, I was gonna say that's obviously one aspect of it as well. Are there any other big differences between Europe, your EMA, and the FDA? Are there any other big notable differences?
So I think there are a couple things. Yeah, there are a couple of things. If I can go into the details, but
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
like p values. There are different expectation p values. There's difference depends on your area. There's different endpoints, so that can become quite a good for a strategist to create a strategy in which you can have a clinical trial with the same endpoints.
Hmm.
So like for example in cancer, some areas in the European Union they want to OS, okay, overall survival. FDA accept PFS, so there are differences. So that's the
Hmm.
kind of thing. When you're doing this strategy, you need to understand exactly your endpoint. Does a small company or a big company, are you doing you're going to the TGA in Australia, you're going to Europe,
Yeah. Yeah.
because when you build a clinical trial, because what you don't want to do is, as a strategist in regulatory, to build that strategy. And then you get to the Europeans and they're like, oh no, I'm sorry, you just spent $300 million in this clinical trial, but we don't like your endpoint, or we don't like this, we
Sure.
don't like that. That's the kind of thing. So there are a few differences. I do feel that what I tell people is that understand where you at from the beginning. When you're working with the Europeans, you need to understand a few things. Number one is that people is not like FDA. FDA control the entire United States. Okay.
Hmm.
Here we have the EMA. However, when you're doing clinical trials, you're not actually working with the EMA. A lot of people that don't understand that, they think, oh, you're going to the
Hmm.
EMA. No, at clinical trial level, you're doing your specific competent authorities, your national competent
Okay.
authorities. Okay.
Right.
So now you think about it. You're going to start a clinical trial. You have an endpoint. An endpoint for the Germans may not be the same endpoint that you're going to be able to produce to your Greeks or to your Italians. So
Right.
those are the
Okay.
kind of things you need to do. They have different expectations. So this is why it's so important to understand the behavior, the culture behavior, the organizational behavior from the EMEA, because the EMEA is not like FDA. It's a collection
Yeah.
of so many different cultures. And there's sometimes, depends on how how's your EMEA representative is, your rapporteur, co-rapporteur, they have different opinions.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Because if they are Italians, if they are Portuguese, if they are, Germans, if they are, they're Irish, they have different ideas. So those are the kind of
Mhm.
things that you cannot ignore that behavior or that culture perspective, because you may actually have a surprise. So I tell people, with the EMEA and even with the confident authorities, being collaborative is a very good thing.
Mhm.
Don't ignore scientific advice. With my FDA, if I, as a consultant, sometimes I tell people, listen, your process is straightforward. There's no need to go for a pre-IND for FDA. We can send
Mhm.
IND directly because it is straightforward. And I know it's a very transactional process with FDA. I know exactly what to expect. If you're doing the same thing in the EMEA, may say, listen, we need a 2 or 3 regulatory scientific advice because
Mhm.
those are the kind of things that one should understand very early. And unfortunately, that is not something that is written down. This is something
Yeah.
comes with experience. So that come back to understand that you don't know what you don't know, and
Yeah.
understand that it's okay to ask questions.
You've kind of answered the next question I had, which was going to be how are companies approaching interactions differently within each region? But I suppose if I were to change my question now, is the mindset towards risk different depending on which region you're working in?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the whole thing. Is not even within Europe. There's a difference. If I actually propose something for the Germans, to the Italians, it's completely different risk profile. The Germans are a lot more
Hmm.
conservative. Do you know what I mean? So now, of course, we also have the maturity here in the UK that although we're now out of the European Union, we still have another behavior that you need to deal with it. And
Hmm.
actually, before the British was actually very much that almost like Switzerland. Do you know what I mean? They were the
Yeah.
Switzerland
Yeah.
of the EMEA. This is to be in the middle and
Sure.
try to find
Yeah.
that. Now, that actually can be very helpful even outside of the EMEA. When you go to meetings, there's almost like a translation between different cultures.
Hmm.
So it all depends how aggressive your clinical trial is. If you're doing pediatric clinical trials, doing like, for example, pediatric clinical trials is not something that there's a different risk profile that you would have with adult clinical trials. So those are the kind of
Hmm.
things, and that risk can be very interesting in countries like Africa. Because the risk profile of countries in Africa or even South America is completely different.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Because certain things have different values in different areas.
Hmm.
And what I mean is, the medication you do it, the payments of clinical trials. So little things like that you cannot ignore culture.
Yeah.
People, sometimes underestimate the value of understanding the behavior of those organizations when you're putting a regulatory process in place.
One thing I've noticed when speaking to people and obviously working positions for sponsor companies is I'd say a few years ago there was a definite I just need someone to do the US piece, whereas increasingly even in more junior positions there is an appetite for I want US and Europe. I want someone who's already thinking globally in their career, and that's now happening earlier and earlier in the career. People are doing CTAs and helping with MAAs and other things as well. And so my question to you is, how does global regulatory experience actually change the way someone thinks strategically?
I think absolutely change everything. I think listening to different perspectives makes us grow as a person. Therefore,
Mm.
will make you grow as a professional. Okay, so that's number one. I think number two is that nowadays companies, small or big, they are expecting you to be more effective, as quick, because they want to make money as quick as
Yeah.
possible, right? Everybody wanted to gain into a market as quick as possible. So that's when you go what we discussed a bit early. Your strategy, even if you're not a full strategist, but remember, even if you are really right now at that level of your career that you're not doing strategy, you can start learning, listening. You see your manager doing strategy. think about it, question them. Are you considering that? Because if you do a clinical trial, phase 2, that is not going to be, that then you're going to need to repeat in a different region, you just
Hmm.
spend time and money that you don't need to. So that's the kind of thing you need to start thinking um, early about about the regulatory systems, and think about what are you going to do. So this is why it's
Hmm.
interesting to understand where you're going to go if you really want approvals globally. And now Canadian is a big player. Do you know what I mean? There's a big players out there, and you need to understand exactly what their expectations and what are their culture behaviors, so you can understand exactly how to plan for that.
I want to make a transition a bit more into the role of regulatory itself and how it's changed and developed over the years. And a topic that me and you thought could generate a bit of interest was the discussion that regulatory is becoming more strategic, but the operational work is still fundamental to the function. My first question to you is, in your opinion, has regulatory affairs become more strategic over the years?
Yes. Yes, it has. And again, you don't need to have a title of strategist to be strategical.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes, big or small, companies and employers are expecting you to get faster approvals, like I mentioned. They want to reach the market as soon as possible. Therefore, you need to be strategic. Even if you're not
Hmm.
this is why sometimes I tell people, even if you're in CMC, you need to be strategic, because if I need to do 10 different essays, or if I want to transfer essay, that takes time. Do you know what I mean? So this is why I
Hmm.
tell people, is your essay good enough? So even in a CMC perspective, even if you need to think strategically, and thinking strategically is always a winning situation, because you're thinking, okay, how can I help people? How can I do something?
Hmm.
And you don't need to be in a strategist, because sometimes you see positions open up as a strategist. You don't need to be a strategist as a position title to be
Hmm.
strategic. And I really tell you, anyone that is listening, you start thinking strategic, and you don't need. It's not reading regulatory. Listen from different people. Read a strategy book. You know, uh, listen to your grandfather when you're playing chess. Because I tell people all the time, regulatory is not really tic-tac-toe or is a chess game. You need to be
Yeah.
5 moves ahead of your competent authority. You need to understand exactly what their next move, so you can avoid them or answer the questions. Because the
Hmm.
worst thing that you can go is go to a regulatory agency and they threw your question and you don't know the answer. You need to say, "Oh, sorry, we're going to need to come
Hmm.
back to you," because then you lose the momentum. So being strategic doesn't mean you need to have a title strategist, but it will become more and more important. But to do that, you need to have a very solid understanding of the operations. Because as
Hmm.
we mentioned before, if you don't know what the constraints and the boundaries you need to work on, how can you actually think about it? Everyone can come up with a great idea. That doesn't mean it's implementable. Do you know what I mean? You cannot
Hmm.
implement idea that is outside of the law or the boundaries of regulation. So that's where I think we need to work. But yeah, it is the expectations. I would not hire anyone as a leader. And my last job, I was the chief regulatory and quality officer. I did all the interviews. I always was in the final interviews. And my
Hmm.
question is always to understand, even in the low levels, can this person has a hint of a strategy in their thinking? They don't need to be a full strategist, but they need to start
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
strategically.
Yeah. And how should people think about the relationship between operation regulatory work and strategic regulatory leadership?
I think they need to understand that they need to understand the solid operation side completely.
Hmm.
Then they can start thinking about, because then they understand the boundaries, the constraints of their work. Then they start thinking about, regulatory. You need to understand safety is paramount. You
Yeah.
can you can have a great product. The product can be extremely efficacious. If it's not safe, it's never going to be in the market. Okay,
Hmm.
so you need to understand. So what I tell people is always understand your safety boundaries. How can you do it? How you understand that, you need to understand the constraints you're working on, and then you can build your strategy. If you are not yet doing strategy for a living, I would suggest learn from other people. if you see your manager come up with, I work with teams that sometimes I normally will come back and say, hey guys, this is what I present to the board. This is what I present to the leadership team. Let me show you what I present. If you have a
Hmm.
question at that point and you're 100%, ask. There's no wrong. There's nothing wrong to say, listen, I didn't get, why did you go this way or that way?
Hmm.
And then you start thinking, because people, again, it's back to the culture. Different perspectives come with different, opportunities to learn. And that's what I would
Hmm.
suggest. You don't need to have a mentor mentee program in your organization to find people to mentor you by ask questions. So I always tell people, do you know what? If you don't have a mentor mentee program in your organization, just say to someone, I saw that slide that I really like it. Can we have a coffee? And can I ask a couple questions? I'm pretty sure someone will never say no to you. And that's
Yeah.
how you start building your strategic thinking, because other people may have more experience, more time to think about it. And you're like, ooh, I haven't thought about that. And that's how you build.
Yeah. And I think what you said there is spot on. And it's kind of where my journey in this all began, is that I found that in the beginning, if I was very open and said, look, I'm new to regulatory affairs and, I'm specialized in recruitment in it, can whilst I'm talking about this opportunity, can you try and educate me as well so I can do this better? And the patience and understanding that people had for me at all levels was so beneficial to me. It really helped get me to where I was today and be able to, competently have discussions about what it is regulatory people do. And when it comes to hiring for people, it's also actually good for them to know that I know what it is they do and what they're looking for. And this whole community that I've conceived here and these interviews is reflective of people want to share their knowledge and experience. People want to help each other out, and I think that's something that's in the core of regulatory affairs. No matter how big it gets, I think it's something that's cultural and expected across the whole gambit, because you kind of have to, especially with how much things
Right.
are changing. You all have to
Exactly.
interpret together at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because we came from health, you're a pharmacist, we're a biologist.
Mm,
You already came with that idea that I want to give something. Do you know what I mean? That was part of my when I decided to go to pharmacy school, is because I want to help. So I think most of us already have that, and I think
mhm,
because of that, we can use that to not only learn ourselves by asking questions, but I think we need to also think. I always tell my team, when I had a big team, I used to tell them, you need to think about it. If you do the right thing for a patient, if you think about what is the right thing for that patient, and you're doing the right thing for the organization, because if you have a buy-in for a patient, you're going to sell product. If you're doing the right thing for the company, guess what? You're doing the right thing for yourself. You're getting your bonus,
mhm,
you're getting a success product. So that's the whole thing. I think if you start thinking, what is the right thing for the patient? From a regulatory perspective, what did a patient would expect? What did that doctor that is prescribing the product would expect? And that's
mhm,
one of the things that when I build a strategy, I always thinking about it. And I always try to say, okay, can we involve patient organizations that do that? What is important for the patients? What is important? Because I think sometimes we can be very focused. Like I work a lot of oncology. So it's when a doctor, oncologist are coming in, they want to save those patients' lives. But if that patient, have a miserable life, although it is being saved, may not be the primary goal for that patient.
yeah,
So this is why sometimes drugs that help that survival process is as important as the survival itself. So those are the kind
yeah,
of things that when you build a strategy, this is why I tell people safety is paramount. Think about it. Products in the FDA never going to accept a product, DMEA, a product that is not safe. Doesn't matter how
mhm,
efficacious. So what can you do? What kind of endpoint I can do to prove that product safe? Those are the kind of things you need to think about it. And as you start thinking about if you know your operational side, you can start being strategic and ask people, talk to people. And actually, one of the things you said that is very good, you're creating this community. So you don't need to be your boss. Do you know what I mean? I have people that worked with me 10 years ago, and once in a while I'll call, I was like, hey, can we have a virtual coffee? I would love to kind of
yeah,
pick your
yeah,
brain on this. And I'm open to it because it's important. And I'll tell you one thing, it's not only one sided. It's not me giving them I actually have learned with people with with a lot less experience than I have, because sometimes we that have been doing this for over 30 years, we overcomplicate things as well.
yeah, yeah.
we overcomplicate certain things. And it's nice to hear, from people. And that's one of the things that I always tell people when I was in a good group. One of the biggest experience I had was we had a regulatory challenge, and I had a monthly meeting, and I called this special meeting to have a discussion. And it was really interesting because we all discussing, all my regulatory strategists was discussing. And then this lady that she just was out of college, maybe for 1 year, she says, "Oh, may I ask a
Hmm.
question? Maybe a silly question." And she asked a question, and me and another, my senior director, we laugh. And it was really interesting because she was like, "I'm sorry, was that a silly question?" I said, "No, we're laughing because you just resolved the problem that we are overcomplicating here for
Yeah.
about 20 minutes." She actually, by asking a very simple question, actually brought us all to the basics of regulatory. Like, okay, why are we overcomplicating this? This is actually very simple. So this is why I'm saying, never actually think that, oh, because I'm out of college for 1 or 2 years or 5 years, whatever, I'm gonna ask a silly question. As long as
Yeah.
you say, listen, I'm not sure that this is the way to go, but how about this? It's absolutely fine. People are open to listen to you. And you actually, that exchange will help you to learn as well. So I
Hmm.
always tell people, I never say to people, no, 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 listen to, we have a lot of experience, because that young lady showed me that day that we were absolutely overcomplicating the situation. And even today, she's a brilliant right now director, a brilliant director. But 20 years ago, she was just out of college, and she solved a problem that I'm telling you right now, they would have had to spend us, me and my senior director, and a couple other of us, maybe a couple hours doing it, because we were absolutely underestimating how simple the answer could have been.
You get tunnel visioned. You
Tunnel
you
vision.
need fresh set of
Absolutely.
eyes.
Absolutely.
um, One thing I wanted to ask before we move on from the strategy operation piece is, and I kind of feel like you have answered it. Do you think someone can be strategic without first understanding the operational side?
I think they can try. Some people are very good naturally, but
Yeah.
I do think that you need to understand your constraints. Because if not, it becomes this maverick attitude, and then you lose your credibility with FDA. If you come up with FDA
Yeah.
with this
Yeah.
great strategy, the FDA is like, okay, they're trying to being outside of the boundaries, you're going to lose your ability to be respected. One of the things that I tell people when I talk to FDA or even to the MHRA, the MEA, they know that even when I come up with something a little bit more, pushing the envelope, they know that I'm still within the constraints of the law, and I
Yeah.
never would put patient safety at risk. So I think you can try, but you need to understand your constraints.
Mm. As we come to the end of the call, unfortunately, I have a couple of questions I'll try and squeeze in.
Sure.
I wanted to get your thoughts on how you see AI and automation impacting regulatory work in the future.
It will be. I think that, of course, will impact work, but I believe it can help us. I am working with some companies right now. They're working with AI. I think we can use it in a way that can help us. The difficult part of regulatory is, in my opinion, was to keep up to all the new knowledge, the new regulations, the new guidance, the new trends in maintaining a full-time job at the same time, because you still need to deliver to do the deliver. And I think if you can use the AI to support either the work you're doing, okay, because you actually have an AI that can write some of the submissions, or
Yeah.
your AI to help you learn the process. Do you know what I mean? Like AI to summarize the guidance and give you the points. That, think about it, that can save us time and allow us to do our job and keep on top of it. So I do think people need to embrace, it will take, it's still, I work with this company right now that they're using this AI to write IND, but you still need to have the process. The AI doesn't go outside and pick up
Yeah. Yeah.
anything at once. You still need to understand the process, the documentation you're going to put it in. So it's not going to take our jobs away. It's going to help us to have more time to do other things.
You kind of answered a bit of it there, but with regards to AI being used at the moment, do you see it more helping with operational work, or do you think it's being used more for strategy at the moment? Where do you
No, it's
see it
going to be
being used
more
more?
operation. It's going to be more
More
operation.
operation.
I think the reality is back to what we said about the cultures. The AI is never going to be able, not at least on my lifetime, perhaps in the future, but right now is not able to predict the culture behavior. It's not be able, so it's not going to be on the strategy side of it. It's going to be
Hmm.
pretty much on the operation side. Like for example, can we'll be able to write a 32PS, or S section, do you know what I mean, of IND, is not going to be able to create a full strategy. So those are the kind of things.
Sure.
If we use to help us, I think can be quite good.
Okay. And I've got some quick fire questions to end the discussion on. I've got three here for you. So one is, what career advice do you wish you had received earlier?
Don't actually think that your career or is just what is on our control. I would say I actually take your career development in your own hands. Don't actually hold on and expect someone to give you opportunity. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Ask for that opportunity. I you really think that J&J has said no for me when I said, hey, I want to give you lateral position. I want to learn something else and then get someone else. Ask for it. Don't expect someone. Another thing
Yeah.
is, if you want to go to this strategic mindset, even if you want to do the go to become a strategist in regulatory, or even if you don't, think about it being develop your own strategic mindset. Think
Yeah.
about it. And when I say that, is about knowledge, is about not be afraid to ask your advice for the people, but also learning for the people, not only in regulatory. Like for me, I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. The biggest learn that I had, I was doing grad school when Pete Carroll, which is the USC head coach for the
Yeah.
Trojans football team, was actually doing it. He won 7 consecutive conference titles. He went to the Seahawks, and he's one of those guys that won both the college football national championship, Super Bowl. I started looking and reading. How exactly does he manage? How is his regulatory, I'm sorry, his strategic process of thinking?
Yeah.
How does he does this? How does he work with leadership? So it doesn't need to be in regulatory. Doesn't need to be your boss. Doesn't need to be pick up some books and read about it.
Mm.
Build yourself. Don't expect someone to give that in your hands. You need to take your initiative and start doing it. That's my 2 cents.
I agree with that. I'm someone who's always trying to see what someone else is doing. How can that inform my development? How can I process that? Do I agree with it? Do I disagree with it? And I always try to find new things to keep pushing forward. Next question for you. If we were to be having this conversation again in 10 years' time, what do you think would have changed the most in regulatory affairs?
I think right now will be the transformation of AI.
Hmm.
I do think we are in a very interesting time in our lives because AI is inevitable. It's going to happen. It's just a question of how we build. And when I say this, is that I say is in on our own personal careers, the regulatory folks that need to think about how we can actually use for our advantage, not against us, but also
Yeah.
how is this managing the behavior of the medical care out there, because remember, you need to think about it, HIPAA and GDPR and all this, because AI is going to take over. Is now, I actually a couple days ago took my dogs to get vaccination, and what happens, they said to me, oh, we are taking notes via AI. If you don't want that, could you please let us know, even on a veterinary
Yeah.
clinic? So that's going to happen. So you need to start thinking about in 10 years how exactly HIPAA is, and actually privacy of your patients and everything else is going to end up on your clinical trials, on everything else. So I think that AI will transform, and we do need to think about it ahead of time. Start thinking about what we can do ahead of time to protect ourselves, because if you're not, you're going to be behind trying chasing the problem versus trying to find a solution early.
And last question, which part of regulatory affairs do you enjoy the most?
Okay, personally, I love this strategy mainly
Hmm.
because I'm one of those people that I'm very competitive, not to with others, but to myself. I always want to improve myself, and I love the idea of being 5 moves ahead of a regulatory authority. I love to go out of a meeting, having a successful meeting, and has said to people come back to me. It's like, oh, but you knew they're going to ask that, and you already had that. I love that part of
Hmm.
it. That for me, the strategy is and be able to think. Another thing is I love the idea to between you and I, it was very profound when someone came to me and says, I work in a product of J&J, and someone came to me and says, I just want to say that your product saved my grandfather's
Hmm.
life. We're working on a drug-eluting stent, and he actually put two of them, and they came to me, and that for me was very rewarding, because I think as because we're not medical, we're not
Yeah,
doctors,
yeah.
we're not really directly there, and I'm not behind the counter anymore as a pharmacist. So you kind of a few steps away from actually literally understanding the impact of on patients, and that was very touching. So for me, trying to get good products on the market as quick as possible, that keeps me going. That is again is a almost competing with myself. Telling me, how can I get the best strategy out there so I can get that product on the market as soon as possible. So that's what I
Thank you
enjoy.
very much. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. And unfortunately, that is all we have time for. And we'll definitely have you on again, Andie. I know we had loads of topics we could speak about, but thank you very much for joining me and
Thank
for
you.
sharing everything with the community today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Connor.
Perfect. And for anybody who would like to be involved in Regulatory Voices, feel free to reach out to me and we can get something booked in and talk about something you're passionate about. This will be uploaded on all the relevant platforms, especially on LinkedIn as well. If you have any questions on anything we spoke about today, feel free to comment and at either Andie or myself, or contact us directly. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.